Good evening and welcome to Maine Public's Your Vote 2020 First District Congressional Debate. I'm Jennifer Rooks and we are live at the Augusta Civic Center. For the next hour, we will hear from the two candidates in the race on a range of front burner issues with the help of Maine Public's senior political correspondent Mal Leary and chief political correspondent Steve Mistler. A few notes on tonight's setup. We are in the auditorium of the Augusta Civic Center. The reason? To provide safe space for both the candidates and our crew. The candidates are spaced 16 feet apart. Our moderators are separated by plexiglass. There are no spectators other than our own crew and a few campaign staffers. Everybody is masked and safely distanced. Now let's meet the candidates in order determined by a coin flip before the debate. The incumbent Democrat Congresswoman Chellie Pingree of North Haven is seeking her 7th term in office. And Republican challenger Jay Allen of New Harbor is a family physician and combat veteran. In our first segment, we are going to ask the questions to the candidates, their views around a number of issues of interest to Maine voters. And each candidate will have about 90 seconds to answer, 15 seconds for rebuttal if necessary. Up first, the COVID-19 pandemic and the federal government's response. And we're going to go to Mal Leary, who first has a question for Jay Allen.
Dr. Allen, you're a family physician, but you've made it clear that you believe the state has gone too far in some of its restrictions, including masking. How would you go about protecting the public from the spread of this pandemic?
Well, masking can be effective, but my point has not been the effectiveness of masks. My point is that the numbers have been so low that we have not needed mandates. I checked some numbers today, and presently we are at 6.67 people per 10,000 people in population. That's not enough numbers to justify a mask mandate. By the CDC's own guidelines, 8 out of 10,000 people represents a very low risk of transmission. A moderate risk of transmission is 8 to 16 people, and a high rate of transmission is 16 or greater cases per 10,000 in any particular area. We have 4 counties that meet the moderate guideline. Every other county in this state meets the low guidelines, low risk of transmission. So it makes no sense to mandate masks when there's such a low risk of transmission. And part of my issue is that it's a freedom issue. We have been treated like children. We have been told that you have to do this. We have not, my feeling is informed consent. It goes back to what we were taught in medical school, informed consent. You tell people the risk, you tell them the benefits, and then you let them make their own decisions. And with this rate, we should be allowed to choose whether we mask or not.
But what would you propose to try to protect the public? You've talked about things you don't like. Are there policies, procedures you think we should be implementing to help stop the spread?
So the guidelines that we put into place were to stop the spread so that we could get things going again, so that we could prepare the hospitals. The problem is we have mission creep. The mission went from preparing the hospitals to stopping this virus dead cold, and we can't do that. We will never be able to do that. We need to follow the Great Barrington Declaration and allow people to go about their normal lives while we protect those who are at risk.
A quick follow-up, Mr. Allen, if I might, about the Great Barrington Declaration, which essentially calls for allowing people of low risk to go about their lives as normal, and of basically taking people of high risk, which is about a third of the U.S. population, and protecting them somehow. How do you protect all those people if we can't even protect nursing homes?
Well, the reason we can't protect nursing homes is because we send people into nursing homes who are sick.
Right.
So, and some of the nursing homes are not following procedures, not following policies. We do need to be more careful in situations like nursing homes. There, it is more reasonable to demand masks, to demand social distancing. But for people who are at very low risk of complications, we should not be mandating masks.
Steve, a question for Chellie Pingree.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I find this really difficult to hear because, first off, when you're wearing a mask, if you don't know you have the virus, you are protecting everyone around you. So one of the reasons you wear it is a benevolent act for everybody else. So first off, I don't understand why anyone would not want to do that. Second, we know that people shed the virus before they know they have it, that some people are asymptomatic. So to say that, it's a low risk and you don't have to do this is ridiculous. People in Millinocket who went to the wedding didn't know they were going to get sick. People in Waldo County who went to church didn't know they were going to get sick. Those were low number places. But, I just don't think you can say it's okay not to wear a mask. If we all wear masks, we'd get over this much quicker.
Can I
Go
respond?
ahead. Yep.
So there are a couple things. First of all, it's a matter of probability. You can look at the numbers in the population, in the county, in the state, and calculate a probability of exposure. But the other thing is that we are actually prolonging this by asking people to socially distance, socially isolate. Sweden has reached herd immunity by allowing people to go about their normal lives.
Sweden has not, by any measure, reached herd immunity. Sweden is trying some interesting things, and they're certainly going to do some research. But the last number I saw is about 12% of the population has been affected. My understanding is you have to have at least 50% of the population affected. In the United States, if we had to have 50% of the population affected, estimates are that 2 million people would die and we would overwhelm our hospitals. So talking about herd immunity is about as irresponsible an idea as I've heard.
We're going to move on. Steve has a question for Chellie Pingree. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Hi. Many people watching and listening tonight are very frustrated with the fact that Congress has been able to come to a deal on a COVID relief package, another one. Do you think that Democrats are playing politics with this issue, knowing that no deal could impact some Republicans in vulnerable House races, for example?
Absolutely not. It would be the height of irresponsibility to play politics with this. We have multiple conversations and caucus calls. I was on one this week about the nitty-gritty of the negotiating. There was a negotiating session today. There will be another one tomorrow. And we certainly have been working hard to come to an agreement with either the Senate or the administration. We first voted on a package in May. We voted on again about 2 or 3 weeks ago. We've been willing to shrink the numbers, but there are some things we won't take out of the package, and it's very hard to get to an agreement. One of those is aid to state and local government. Every state in the country, whether you're a red state or a blue state, is dealing with revenue shortfalls. There's no way not to. And also, every county, every municipality, and this is going to continue to affect us in Maine. If we want to bring our economy back together, we have to have that money. The president has opposed it. Mitch McConnell has opposed it. They said things like, well, let the states go bankrupt, or it's only the blue states that mismanage, which is just completely untrue and irresponsible. We also are having disagreements on the limits to liability. They want basically none. So if you're an employer, and there are places where, somebody owns a restaurant and they have a sign up and they say no masks allowed here because they're making a political statement. Well, what if you're a waitstaff in there or the bartender and you get sick? Well, they want to make sure that they're absolved of all responsibility. So we're down to the last sticky issues. I mean, I would give anything to have passed this before because people are hurting. We're not going to fix this problem until we provide more support for it. I'm a huge supporter of what we're doing, and I'm very willing to negotiate. But it's been difficult negotiating with the president, who, as you recall, 2 weeks ago said, it's off the table. Next day said, oh, I guess we're going to do it again.
Thank you. And Jay Allen, just a few seconds. Do you believe Congress should be bringing some more relief to states and cities?
Yes, I believe they should, but the problem that we're seeing with the bills that are being put forward is that there's too much extra stuff being put into those bills. We need something that is a clean bill, something that concentrates on what our response to COVID is. It shouldn't be stuffed full of pet projects and things like that.
Okay.
The other thing is we do need limits on liability because people will take this and sue. They're sue happy. So we need to have some limits on liability to protect those people who are opening responsibly.
Okay, Matt
And
Leary,
just to
we're
be
going
clear, there could be an agreement on a middle ground. I agree with you. You have to have some limits. Nobody can be responsible for everything, but you can't have none.
All right, Matt Leary, we're going to move on to the issue of health care, and we're going to go to Chellie Pingree first this time.
You support Medicare for all, but given the difficulty politically of making that happen, what would you propose in the meantime to do in the form of changes to the Affordable Care Act or some other legislation to provide affordable health care till you get to that goal that you want?
Well, I understand and I agree with you that it's not an easy thing to go to Medicare for all or single-payer health care overnight, even though the vast majority of the public thinks it would be a better plan, would like to get rid of dealing with an insurance company, and it would bring down costs. But you're right, it's a difficult thing to do overnight. The first thing we should do if we ever have the opportunity, particularly if the Democrats have the vote in the Senate again, is to fix some of the issues that we've had with the Affordable Care Act since it started. But as you know, the Republicans voted over 50 times to repeal it, and it would never allow a bill to the floor except one that did some kind of damage to it. So there are things that could be shored up. I do think that we could start by increasing the number of people who are covered under Medicare, maybe gradually dropping the age, so that you could include more people. One of the most critical things that I would do that didn't get included in the Affordable Care Act is to provide a public option. It came down to the last few votes, and we didn't get that to get the votes that we needed for the Affordable Care Act when it was voted on in 2009. But a public option would be like having a Medicare choice for people. They could still go back to one of the other plans. They could get their employer's health care, but it would be another option. It's been worked out and talked about, and I think it would give us a great start.
So how would that actually work in the practical world of insurance and politics?
Well, my guess is it would be somewhat like dropping the age on Medicare. You would have a program similar to Medicare that you could buy into, so you're buying it like any other insurance, but it would be competitive on the marketplace. You'd see what it was going to cost. You'd know, was it a gold or silver plan or all the things you look at if you look at your health care on the exchange now. But it would be publicly run. It would be without the insurance company's engagement.
All right, Steve Mistler, question for Jay Allen.
You have said that the Affordable Care Act was designed to basically pave the way for single payer, and it was built to be unaffordable. But over time, this law has become more popular, and especially provisions like protecting pre-existing conditions. What would your solution be if the Affordable Care Act were to go away, which it's certainly could be hobbled or dismantled, depending on what happens with the Supreme Court after the election?
So let me make clear that any Republican who talks about healthcare reform says that they will guarantee pre-existing conditions are covered. But problems with single payer are it will limit choices. Single payer, if you go to that, will eliminate public or private and employer-sponsored health insurance plans because everyone will need to be on this single payer plan. She talks about it decreasing costs. It will not decrease costs. It will switch where the costs are paid. Instead of being paid out of pocket, they'll be paid on your tax bill. Taxes will need to go up for the rich, the middle class, and the working class in order to pay for all the benefits that are provided by the single-payer health insurance.
What if the Affordable Care Act is dismantled, though, setting aside the single-payer?
So what Americans want is affordable health care that allows them to choose their doctor and allows them to choose what benefits they get. We are not currently allowed to choose our benefits. If you go buy car insurance, you're allowed to choose what kind of coverage you want. We are not allowed that choice with health insurance because we have to accept the overall plan. We have to accept a comprehensive plan. So what we need to do is give patients more choice. I think the best way to do that that's been proposed so far is increasing the scope and capacity of health savings accounts. And that would give patients more control over their dollars, allow them to choose how those dollars are spent, and in the long run would save money.
All right, we're going to go to the issue of Social Security now. We'll go to Chellie Pingree first with Mal Leary.
According to the system trustees, Social Security will be insolvent in about 15 years. That assessment was made before the pandemic. Many believe it's going to be a much shorter period now. You've signed on to legislation that would tax the wealthiest of Americans for Social Security to restore solvency until the year 2100. Taxing the wealthy would likely not garner bipartisan support, particularly if the Senate's still controlled by the Republicans. So what would your solution be?
Well, I'm not ready to give up on that particular bill, which does create a solvency until 2100, and I think it's basically a good plan. What it does is it taxes your income up to $400,000. Right now, your income is only taxed up to about $130,000. So everybody above that just stops paying into the system, even though they're able to collect on the system and, you know, have the ability to pay in more. That would give us solvency to 2100. That's a huge difference between 2100 and 2034. It might allow us to increase the amount of money given out in Social Security. We could change how the COLA system works. It has a variety of benefits, and I'm willing to, you know, have a good solid fight around that and see, you know, if the Republicans have an alternative plan, a better way to do it. I'm open to listening to it, but I haven't heard of one since. The only thing I've generally heard from the other side is the idea of privatizing Social Security, not paying into it at all. That puts people at a great risk because you're vulnerable to the stock market, and a lot of people don't, you know, have a good idea of how to best invest that money, and they're better off knowing that they have that guaranteed income and it'll be there for them.
But that guaranteed income, in most cases, is not enough for people to live on. I'm sure you've heard from a lot of your constituents about how it's just not enough. What would you propose for additional incentives, be they tax credits for IRAs or other various instruments from the federal government to provide that additional revenue when you're retired?
I think any kind of incentive that makes it easier for people to save, particularly the middle class or people who don't generally have plenty of money to save, but the matching plans is a good idea, particularly if you don't have an employer who puts money into your 401k and matches it. So I do think those are good ideas, and I agree with you. There's not enough money in Social Security for many people to be able to, you know, pay housing costs, put food on the table, do all the other things, buy prescription drugs that people have to do during retirement.
All right, Steve Mistler, a question for Jay Allen.
You've said that you've never planned on relying on Social Security because you've set aside money for yourself. What about the folks that can't do that? What should they do? And I mean, should there be time limits on when people are eligible, or what do you propose to do for those folks that don't have enough money to set aside now for when they're of retirement age?
Well, one of the things that you can do is you can look at who most needs Social Security and gear the benefits towards them. So if you earn over a certain income,
So means testing.
Yeah, maybe you wouldn't be able to draw your Social Security because you planned on other things, or maybe you get a lower Social Security benefit than what you would normally be eligible for. So that's one option that you could look at. You know, there are other options out there. I'm not real versed in what those options might be, but certainly there are options better than taxing the rich, because that's always the solution for Democrats, is tax the rich. And that's not a solution, because eventually you run out of other people's money, and you just cannot keep taxing the rich.
How old should you be before you stop working?
Well, Americans are living older now. So used to be retirement age was 65. There are people who are working into their 70s, 75. Some are even working into their 80s. Some are doing that because they need to. They need the money. But other people are doing that because they still enjoy working. They still enjoy contributing to society. So I don't think there should be a mandatory retirement age, but you should have the flexibility to decide when you want to retire.
Can I just say, people do have the ability to decide when they want to retire, and many people do keep working but not take their Social Security until they're older and have a different benefit. But I've heard the proposal multiple times about raising the age, and I think particularly in a state like Maine, where a lot of people do physical labor, work in the trades, it's hard to ask people to keep working well into their 70s just to keep things going, especially if you've been working hard all your life and it's time to take a break.
And again, that would be directed towards people who already have supplemental income that they could rely on. So it wouldn't be those working class people.
Next, we're going to move on to the issue of racism, which has come to the fore in the wake of the death of George Floyd and others at the hands of police. We're going to stay with Jay Allen first and Leary with a question.
You've said that you don't believe that there's systematic racism in the U.S., but given the fact that data research have extensively documented the ways in which Black Americans are underrepresented or overrepresented or experience different treatment while from their counterparts in all kinds of areas, from employment, home ownership, wealth, and incarceration. How do you factor all of those into your position? And how do you define systematic racism?
So systemic racism is a policy that's set into place that automatically discriminates on the basis of race. And that would be, for example, discriminating against someone because they're African American or black. And we have policies that actually say the opposite. We say you cannot discriminate on the basis of sex. You cannot discriminate on the basis of race. You cannot discriminate on the basis of religion. So if people are discriminating on those bases, they are already going against the laws that are in place. And I think that if you go around to your typical American, no matter what race they are, they will have friends of the opposite race. They will have friends that they associate with, that they enjoy spending time with. I know when I served in the military, we had people of all different races. We had Orientals, Polynesians, we had Hispanics, we had African Americans. Some of them were co-workers, some of them were my bosses. I had a battalion commander who was African American. He was a great boss. I really enjoyed working with him. So to say that there's systemic racism belies the fact that people in general are not racist. Now, there are systemic issues that do lead to poorer outcomes for African Americans, but those are not related to racism. Those are related to the environments where they grow up and not having fathers in the home. If we want to fix those problems, we need to fix having fathers in the home.
Mal?
What about the specific area, though, that we've seen several studies on from the federal government, that blacks are killed at 2.8 times higher than whites by police agencies? That's from 2009-2012 period. Why is it that showing some systematic racism?
Well, crime is committed by more African Americans too, and again, it goes back to the fact that they are raised in homes that do not have fathers, that do not have that principled leadership within the home. And that's the problem that African American families are facing. The African American family used to be a family-centered home, but since the since the 60s, that has been destroyed by encouraging practices where the family is better off if the father leaves the home.
You're saying that police officers are more likely to shoot a black person because there's a father?
They are less likely because they know that if they shoot a black person, then they will face an inquisition if they shoot that black person. So they have to be pretty sure that that black person needs to be shot.
Can I?
Yes.
Thanks. Well, I just want to take the opposite point of view. I certainly think that we have systemic racism, and I disagree that the challenges that black people have been facing is because of the lack of fathers in the home. I've seen many wonderful single moms who raise great families and do an incredible job. And frankly, there's a huge change in the way families are in the United States today, and so it's not fair to say a problem that a race faces is strictly because there are no fathers in the home. Systemic racism, it's not a policy. That's what is different about it. Yes, we do have policies, and we have to keep looking at our policies, but we're talking about those very things that were mentioned in the question. Employment, wealth, health measures. Black people do not have the same opportunities, whether it's money invested in the schools or access to medical care, a whole variety of things. And those are part of our system. They've been part of our system for a long time, whether it was redlining of houses or less money spent in schools in certain neighborhoods. These are things that we all have to have a level of awareness of and do something about it.
Steve Mistler, why don't you continue with Chellie Pingree?
Well, that was a great segue to my question.
What
should Democrats do to show leadership on this issue? What could they do?
Well, I mean, first off, we've had a variety of proposals before us. We did pass the George Floyd policing bill that was very specifically to look at the issues around policing and whether there's racial bias, more training, more studies, banning chokeholds. Just a variety of things that were strictly about policing practices. And there are some other bills looking at that too. But I think to look at the broader issue, again, we have to acknowledge that it exists. and B, have to understand, what in our system, whether it's access to health care, making sure that everyone has access to preventable and affordable health care, and would that change, for instance, the measures of many more Black and Hispanic people getting COVID and having worse outcomes of it. Education, being able to get a good education, starting out with preschool education in neighborhoods that don't have schools that are as good or don't have access to preschool. We're still fighting over SNAP benefits. And, poor families are disadvantaged by not having enough food. Little kids are disadvantaged if they don't have healthy foods when they're growing up in terms of brain development and their ability to succeed later. Building wealth, owning homes. These are all things that, Black people are disadvantaged, and you can't look at these numbers and not feel you need to do something about it. But it's across the board. When you ask me what should Democrats do, it's across the board. We have to be cognizant of all these things and take action on a lot of things that are prime concerns of ours.
Can I ask just a specific question about law enforcement and the concept of qualified immunity? Should that be looked at? And is there a danger if there is an overhauling of the laws for qualified immunity for police officers that there would be a spike perhaps in civil suits against police officers?
Well, first off, I'm very grateful to the police officers who, so many who do an incredible job, protect us, keep us safe, work very hard. And here in Maine, we're not often served by big police departments. It's usually rural sheriffs, people who have to cover a lot of territory like our state police. Qualified immunity has been shown to be an issue. I've signed onto a bill to look at modifications of that because I think all too often it makes it impossible to investigate a death and find out if there were racial bias or if the policemen were at fault, which we know was the case with George Floyd. And people have pretty much universally, any party, most people have said that was wrong. You could see it on a tape. It was wrong. And when that happens, it's got to be possible to go back to that police officer and have a means to make sure that they're indicted or they're disciplined.
Okay, I'm going to try to move along and turn to foreign policy now. Mal, Leary, do you have a question for Chellie Pingree?
I don't get a chance to respond to all that stuff about the police.
Certainly. We were going to try to move on from racism to foreign policy, but if you'd like to say something briefly.
Yeah, I'd like to say that our police officers do a great job, that they have to make split-second decisions, life or death decisions at a moment's notice, and they do not have the capability of having a instant replay. The other thing that she said is that blacks are disfavored, but there are actually a lot of programs that favor African Americans. They are given preferential admission to colleges. They are given a lot of scholarships that are geared directly towards African Americans. So there are things that we are doing to help lift African Americans out of poverty and out of the situation that they're in.
All right. Mal?
Let's move on to foreign policy. Chellie, what are your criteria for going to war? Are there any areas where the U.S. military action may be warranted, and if so, where are those sites that are developing?
Well, it's a good question. It's a very difficult question. I don't think it would be possible to have kind of a policy manual or checklist to say if this and this, then go to war. It certainly has to include that the American people are in harm's way, that important assets to the United States are in harm's way, allied countries, or the beginning of something that we see that could be challenging for the world overall, the beginning of the next war or movement into the European countries from Russia, or something that we can see specifically why it's in danger. Now, as you know, the Congress has been operating under what's called an AUMF that goes back to the 9/11 days. It's never been updated, so Congress actually rarely makes a decision about going to war because most presidents in both parties, it's not either side, use the old AUMF that was speaking about what happened on 9/11 and says, well, this is another authorized opportunity and we can move forward with force. Many members of Congress, again, on both sides of the aisle, have voted to require more AUMFs, to require that we stop using the old ones. And that is a way not to have a policy manual, but to say, hard as it is, you got to have this debate before we go into another country, and it has to be in front of the American public, which many people in Congress would rather not have to do that, and I'm sure it wouldn't be a pleasant time, but that's really important. About the next hotspot, it's hard to tell, but I think that the most concern that we have in terms of, our foreign defense is around Russia, Iran, and China. And today, defense also has to include cybersecurity, where we have a lot of concerns.
All right, and Jay Allen, the same question to you. What are your criteria for going to war, and are there areas where U.S. military action might be warranted?
So I think the most important thing to recognize is, that we need to have clear objectives when we go to war. One of the issues that we've been finding is that we go into a country with initially an objective, but then we develop what we call mission creep, where that just expands into this overall nation stabilizing mission that's irresponsible and that's not what we're supposed to be about. So we need to have clear objectives about when we go into a country and reasons for being there and what our timeline is for accomplishing that mission and getting out of that mission. Now, having said that, there are countries that we've been in since World War II. We've been in Germany since World War II. We've been in Italy since World War II. We've been in Korea since the Korean War. So the problem is we stay there, but we need to have clear objectives about when to get out. Now, there are some countries around this world that we do need to be careful of, and she mentioned them: Russia, China, Iran. North Korea is another one that she did not mention. So there are some countries that we need to be careful about. North Korea is not as much of a threat as it was at the beginning of Trump's presidency, but it's still something that we need to consider as we're looking forward.
All righty. We are going to go to a quick break. When we come back, the candidates are going to have an opportunity to question each other. This is our Your Vote 2020 First District Congressional Debate. We'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. I'm Henry Louis Gates Jr. I wanted to thank you personally for supporting your local PBS station. That's a place where you can learn about the people and the events that most fundamentally have shaped our identity, including the resilience and the compassion that we see shining through today. It's your support that makes it all possible, connecting you to programs that inform, inspire, and delight. It would mean so much if you could continue to show your support to help sustain the vital work of your wonderful station, which in turn will ensure that it thrives not just today, but for the next generation as well. I can't thank you enough for your faith, your confidence, and for your loyalty.
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that I've been complaining very strongly about the ballots.
Is America headed for a constitutional crisis?
I'm being facetious. I said, what country are we in?
Jelani Cobb investigates the early warnings and allegations of voter suppression. Tune in or stream starting October 20th, 9 Central, only on PBS.
Welcome back to Maine Public's Your Vote 2020 First District Congressional Debate. I'm Jennifer Rooks along with Maine Public's Steve Mistler and Mal Leary. We're going to move now to the part of the debate in which the candidates can question one another. We're going to do the same thing as far as timing, 1.5 minutes for responses, but please try to make your questions pretty quick if you can. Jay Allen, first a question for Chellie Pingree.
Okay. So one of the things we saw with the impeachment of President Trump is that it was very partisan. So my question is, would you be able to go against your party if, for example, Biden were to become president and all this stuff in Ukraine does come forward and is proven to be serious allegations that are founded? Or would you be able to go against your party if President Biden gets elected and they decide to infringe upon our Second Amendment rights? Would you be able to go against your party to defend our rights, to defend that which is true and just?
Well, I would never hesitate to go against my party if I thought it was the right move. If Vice President Biden was elected to be the president and it was clear that he had, colluded in rigging the election or committed some kind of crimes, if I thought there was a violation of the Constitution that was promoted, I would certainly be willing to go against that. I happened to look up we were talking before about bipartisanship and crossing the aisle, and I happened to look up the Lugar ratings, and I was 107th out of all 535. So that shows that I do a lot of work across the aisle. I sponsor a lot of bills that Republicans co-sponsor, and when it comes to doing the right thing, I think you should always do that in Congress, no matter what your party says.
All right, Chellie Pingree, a question for Jay Allen.
Well, I wanted to ask you something sort of off the track, because we're always able to sort of spar with each other, as we have been, and thank you for being fair about that. Tell me if this is true. I read somewhere that you actually studied, and I won't get the word like lepidoscopy, the study of moths and butterflies. Is that true, and can you still identify moths and butterflies today? And
So that's partially true. When I was a young lad, I used to collect monarch butterfly caterpillars and raise them. So I kind of identify monarch butterflies and their caterpillars. I can tell you which ones are males and which ones are females, but it's just monarch butterflies.
Well, just as a follow-up, thank you for saying that. I spend a lot of time this summer taking monarch caterpillars off and giving them to my grandchildren to raise up, and I can't tell a male from a female, so maybe I'll have to send you a picture sometime.
Okay.
Jay Allen, your turn for a question for Congresswoman Pingree.
So these programs that are being put forward to help businesses that have been affected by COVID have led to a lot of money coming into the state. And those programs are designed to help those businesses that are struggling to stay afloat. But in a recent article that came out, it was noted that $51,000 went to Nebo Lodge. And you're a multimillionaire. How do you justify receiving that type of money when there are other businesses where the sole income provider is struggling to keep their business afloat?
Well, even though I own the business, I actually lease it to somebody else. I no longer run it. So she has her own business that runs that, and she applied on her own, not knowing how she would survive this season. And I give her great credit for figuring out how to keep it afloat. I don't own the operating business right now, so none of that money came to me.
Okay.
All right, Chellie Pingree, your turn.
I've heard you talk before about your family, and I'm sure you're very proud of your kids. And it sounds like you've homeschooled them much of their lives. And I thought, with all that experience, with so many people home today with their kids and not knowing exactly how to keep them engaged or what's best to do, do you have some suggestions you can make to all those parents out there just struggling to keep their kids engaged?
So most of the homeschooling was done by my wife.
Ah.
So she would be the better person to answer that. She is the expert in the family. But what I can tell you is that we started initially with curriculums. We used curriculums that you can purchase on the market. But as she got further and further into it, she went more towards what we call unschooling, where she basically gave them topics and let them make their own decisions about how to pursue those interests. And the other thing about unschooling is that they follow their interests, so they're more likely to delve deeper into those subjects. They still get a broad education. She still made them spend some time every day in certain subjects like math and English, and a lot of them studied languages as well. But they were able to choose their path forward.
All right.
Good idea.
That section is over. We're going to go back to some front burner issues. Steve Mistler, a question for Chellie Pingree.
Mainers have seen firsthand in this election the impact of Citizens United with this U.S. Senate campaign, $100 million campaign, if you include outside expenditures. One of the big issues that's come up is dark money and groups that are operating to influence the race without having to disclose their donors. My question is that Democrats are using these groups as well, whereas before it was Republicans sort of trailblazing. Does that make it harder to change or to have a bill that could reveal those donors, given that both parties are now utilizing this scheme, if you will, through without having to disclose donors?
Well, first off, I support any kind of campaign finance reform. In my first year in Congress, I wrote a bill that was just sort of a mirror of the public financing system in Maine, and I think we should go to a system like that to get so much of this money out of politics. I completely disagree with the Supreme Court on the Citizens United decision. I don't know if we're going to get that back at the Supreme Court soon, or we would get the right decision. I think you're right. It does pose a problem that both parties utilize all of the money opportunities that are available today. I've heard people refer to it as an arms race, and until your opponent is going to put down the arms, you're not in a position that you can do it too. But that's what it was like before McCain-Feingold. And while that didn't solve the problem because we quickly changed to the dark money, that was what that was intended to do. And before my time in Congress, but it was a bipartisan bill. It got support of the House and the Senate and became law. Like I said, things changed quickly and people found ways to get around it. But I would be very much in favor of eliminating dark money, and I would like to think that when you look at the astronomical amounts of money that are being spent in all states around the country right now to defend or take on a congressional or Senate seat, that someday this just has to pop, and we just, everybody has to agree enough is enough and make a change.
And Jay Allen, the same question to you. Do you believe more disclosure is necessary in campaign spending, and how, given the political realities, would you make that happen if you believe there needs to be more disclosure?
Well, as you pointed out, the Senate race is the most expensive race in the country. On the other hand, my race is the cheapest race in the state, if not the country. We have not accepted any PAC money at all, none. All of our money comes from grassroots donors, no PAC money at all. So Jay Allen has only relied on money from Mainers and from friends across the country. Now, Chellie, about half of her money at the last report was coming from PACs. So she is being subjected to the influences of those PACs. So that affects the way that she's going to represent us here in Maine. My only representation, my only obligation is to the people of Maine. So, I agree that there are problems with the way money is being spent. I believe that there is way too much money being spent on campaigns, especially those closely contested campaigns. And that was one of my biggest disappointments when I came into politics, is the amount of money and how much influence that money has in politics. And I think it's disgraceful because, I was told that I needed $1 million in my bank account in order to be effective in this race. We're not going to reach that. I think we're still going to be effective. But the other thing that it told me was that you have to be rich in order to be able to run for office, which is not the way it should be. Anybody who has the will and the capacity to run should be able to run.
So if you were elected to Congress, what kind of bill would you support to change that?
That's a good question. I think that we do need to limit the amount of money that is spent in campaigns. And I'm not sure of the best way to do that, but I do think that there is too much money in campaigns. And one thing is, I don't think that when congressmen go to Washington, D.C., they should spend any time raising funds, which is what I'm told they do. They spend a large part of their time raising funds. They should be down there working.
All right. And Chellie, 15 seconds to respond to his comment about you.
I completely agree on the part that members of Congress shouldn't spend their time raising money. It's the reason I wanted to have public financing, because I think it would change the life of a lot of people. I've been fortunate. I actually haven't had to raise a lot of money in my campaign, and I don't spend all my time raising money. It's just not something I would do, and I would certainly never be influenced by anyone who gave me money. I'm sure there are people who have donated money to my campaigns who have said, why did she vote that way? Believe me, that's happened.
All right, we're going to move on, and we're going to stay with Jay Allen and go to Leary for the next question about the judiciary.
The whole judicial nomination confirmation process is in the spotlight right now, mostly on the Supreme Court, but there's also been a lot of agitation that when someone is 30 years old and they're named to the bench for life, maybe that's not the way we want to go. Maybe we want term limits. Maybe we want a mandatory retirement age. Have you looked at those issues? Are there any reforms you would like to see with the federal judiciary?
Well, I think it's interesting that the people who are proposing those term limits for the Supreme Court were the same people that nominated and approved the people who have been on the court the longest. So Clarence Thomas, I believe, has been on the court the longest. And there are members of the Senate who have been in the Senate since before he was put in the Supreme Court. So I think it's hypocritical for them to propose having term limits for the Supreme Court where they're not willing to consider term limits for themselves. I've taken a term limit pledge. I have pledged that I will not serve any more than 3 terms in the House of Representatives. Now my opponent is working on her 7th term. So if she had taken the same pledge that I had taken and were true to it, she would not be running in this race right now. She would be letting someone else run. And that is what is the problem with our country right now, is we have people who go down to Washington, D.C. and stay there for years and years and years, and they become detached from the voters that they're supposed to represent. As far as the Supreme Court, you do want someone who's not going to be prone to political pressure. So I think it makes less sense for someone who's being nominated to the Supreme Court to have some sort of limitations on them. It may be wise to propose a mandatory retirement age, but I don't think term limits is the answer.
Chellie Pingree, the same question to you. What kind of reforms, if any, are necessary for the judiciary?
Well, something tells me after this election cycle there will be a lively discussion of the good ideas, the unintended consequences. Any kind of change in the judicial system would be a big shift for us. And I think it could have some things I think would be good. I do think that young judges who are appointed for life don't necessarily reflect the will of the people, when they're 30 years into it. And I think there could be a good argument for a mandatory retirement age, or a term limit on a judge, or a term limit on a member of the Supreme Court. It's not the same as not having term limits on members of Congress. In the House of Representatives, we run every 2 years. You can vote me out, you can allow me to stay, but you can't do that with the Supreme Court. Once they're there, they're there. And so it is very different, and I think it could, we're going to see what that discussion looks like, but I think for the first time in a long time, there will be a lot of proposals, and whatever they are, I think it's really important to consider, both the positive outcome of it, how it could be good for the judiciary, but what unintended consequence might there be. One of the things I'm most concerned about right now is undermining the fundamentals of our democracy. And, if we're fortunate enough to change the occupant of the White House, I think it will be one of the first things that we have to work on. And I don't want to do things that are so extreme on another side that we go to another extreme and make a mess of things again.
All right, we're going to stay with Chellie Pingree, and Steve Mistler has the next question on climate change.
Congresswoman, you support a carbon fee and dividend under which polluters would pay a higher tax and the money would be distributed as a subsidy to households. But the question is how often should that subsidy payment be distributed? Because there's some argument that if you do it around tax time, it's just not often enough for some families. What do you think is the solution there?
I think that's potentially a very good idea. One of the arguments about a carbon tax was that, well, what if it raises the price of gas? What if it raises prices that people have to pay? How do you make sure it comes right back to those people who are challenged the most? So that's the idea. I don't know the best way necessarily to go about doing that. This is in many ways more of a proposal than a really fleshed out idea. That and so many other ideas are just looking at ways to reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we use, to reduce the amount of carbon that we're putting in the atmosphere, and to acknowledge that we have to change our system. We have to move more to renewables, which is happening in many ways because of the marketplace anyway. Increasingly, solar, wind, geothermal is being used because the prices are coming down, and obviously that's one of the great advantages of doing that. But I'm a firm believer in climate change. I'm totally worried that we're not moving fast enough, that we are, disrespecting what we hear from the scientists, which is part of what happened in the pandemic that's gotten us into such a difficult situation. And I also know that, the American public is very concerned about this. We're focused on the pandemic because that is a life or death situation. We're focused on the economy because people are really hurting right now. But when we get to the other side of this, I think it's going to be one of the most important things that this Congress looks at and the next administration tackles in a big way.
All right, Jay Allen, do you believe climate change is caused by human activity, and what is the U.S. role in helping curb it, addressing the problem?
So Mel, Chellie, and I are old enough to remember when the coming climate catastrophe was the coming ice age back in the 70s. We were being told that if we did not do something, we would face another ice age. That changed in the 80s and 90s. We're now being told that it's climate warming, but the climate warming has stopped. There has not been significant increase in temperatures in 10 years. And then the other thing is we are proposing things that will significantly hurt Mainers without doing much benefit. The biggest polluters in our world are China and India. If we address things here, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a scratch when we have an amputated limb, which is the China and India, who are just filling the atmosphere with carbon gas. So it doesn't make any sense for us to make small, minute changes when we have the bigger issue to address. So unless something addresses that issue, there's really no sense in us making it much more difficult for Mainers to live and survive. 60% of Maine seniors are having trouble keeping afloat financially. By raising their gasoline tax by 40 cents per gallon, by raising their oil heating tank charges by $150 per tank, you are going to put significant harm on Maine seniors and Maine poor families. Now, Chellie can afford that, but our Maine families cannot.
Well,
You mentioned China and India, but the fact is the United States is second on that list. So shouldn't we be doing many significant items?
We have decreased our carbon emissions more than any other country since we left the Paris Climate Accords. And that was due to President Trump's leadership.
Can I disagree here?
yes.
Sure, you
briefly.
can, but the facts are the facts.
Well, I disagree. I don't think those are the facts. We definitely have not decreased our carbon emissions, and the president has, gotten rid of a lot of really important laws that would have benefited both the Maine people and our environment. Fighting against the fuel efficiency standards for cars is a ridiculous thing. The auto companies had already agreed to do it. The president wants us to put more gas in our cars. I don't know about you, but my understanding is if you put less gas in your car, if you use less gas, it's going to cost a Mainer less. So making up numbers like it's going to go up 40 cents a gallon or $150 a tank, there are a lot of programs and a lot of proposals to get more solar panels on the roof of elderly people. If that's subsidized and it's something we can do or make their houses more energy efficient, which is part of the LIHEAP program right now, we greatly reduce their energy bills. This is not meant to be something that costs senior citizens more money.
A few seconds.
I agree I disagree. I think it will significantly increase costs for Maine families, especially the seniors who are struggling to keep afloat.
All right, well, we just have enough time left for our closing statements. I'm going to make sure I'm in the right order here. The first is Chellie Pingree. You have 60 seconds for your closing statement.
Great. Well, thank you very much to MPBN for having us here. Thank you to the viewers for watching. Thank you, Dr. Allen, for being here and doing this together and supporting this important part of our democracy. This is the most important election of our lifetime. Our country is facing some of the biggest challenges we've ever experienced. No one imagined that this pandemic could be this big, go on for this long, cause death to so many people. No one thought that our economy could go downhill so fast and the impacts to be so widespread. I've been very dedicated this year to making sure that we did everything we could to support Maine people through this, to support our schools, our education system, to support our businesses, to support our hospitals and our first responders. But you know what? We have so much work to do. We're not even around the corner here. We're not rounding the bend. We have a lot of work to do. I think we have to dig in with all we've got and make sure that we take on these challenges head on and that we're ready to be prepared for the next challenge coming before us. So I've been really privileged to serve the 1st Congressional District, and I hope the voters give me that opportunity to do it again.
All right, thank you, Chellie Pingree. To you, Jay Allen.
So my name is Jay Allen. I'm a 23-year combat veteran. I'm also 26 years serving as a family doctor. I've given more than 10,000 hours of volunteer service to my church and my community. My life has been dedicated to service. My life has been dedicated to service. Everything about my life has been about service. Now, Chellie has been down in Washington, D.C. for 12 years, and she has very little to show for that. She has not passed a single bill into law, Last congressional session, Jared Golden, a freshman senator, introduced more bills than Chellie did. She has not been a significant leader. She has not had significant leadership roles in Congress. She's not been a strong advocate for Maine. You can fill the seat or you can fill the responsibility. For 12 years, we've been filling the seat. We need someone who will fill the responsibility. And we need someone who will be dedicated to service. Her constituent services have been abysmal.
Well, thank you to both of the candidates, and thank you to Mal Leary and Steve Mistler for joining me today. For all of us here at Maine Public, thank you. This debate will be in its entirety on demand at our website, mainepublic.org. Good night.